Hey everybody, I'm David. We're here with another episode of Capital Spotlight. Today we have Jordan Davis of Purple Strategies joining us. Jordan is a personal friend, known him for quite a while now, but man, he's done it all on the Hill and outside the Hill. So he made his way from intern to chief of staff. He's worked for the Energy and Commerce Committee. He has worked on campaigns. He now works on the private side of politics. This man has literally done it all. So we're going to talk to him about that. This episode is definitely a little bit more professionally focused because we figured a lot of you out there have not reached that pinnacle point of your career in politics yet. This man certainly has, so we want to dive into how he got there. Outside of that, we'll talk about who he is as a father and how he balances that with his work life, and that he is a great musician. He won't say it himself, so I had to force it out of him during this, but he plays the guitar, he plays the bass, just a really cool dude. So please listen in. All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Capital Spotlight. We are here with Jordan Davis from Purple Strategies. Jordan, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, David. I told you when you invited me, I'm flattered. So thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Well, this is going to be an exceptionally good podcast. Jordan, you have done it all in Washington, D.C., so we're excited to hear from you. And to start off, can you give us a brief recap of your time in D.C. and what you've been up to?
So I've been in DC coming up on 20 years, but 15 of those years I spent on Capitol Hill, either on the personal, official side, I should say, or the political side. On the official side, I went from lowly unpaid intern up to chief of staff over the course of a pretty dramatic rise over a few short years. But then I also had the opportunity to work at the NRCC during 3 different election cycles, and so that was very rewarding as well. And I finished up my whole career at the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Nice. 4 years there.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, that says it all, right? And now you're over at Purple, so you've done the personal, the committee, the campaign, and done it to the highest level too. And now you go over to the private sector. So tell us a little bit about your work now at Purple. What is Purple, and what are you doing over there?
Yeah, so Purple Strategies has a pretty cool story. It's by its name, you might figure out it's a bipartisan firm.
Shocking.
Literally a red Republican firm and a Democratic blue firm merged together to bring sort of that campaign, consultants, kind of media, all of the things that you might find in a political campaign, but bring that into the corporate space, bring that thinking into corporate reputation management. And that's what the firm now primarily deals with is corporate clients and reputation management. But within that, we do a little bit of public affairs. We have in-house research and creative, and we do a lot of paid media as well. But it's all corporate, but with that political lens applied to it. For
sure. Would you say that the typical person that goes over to Purple had a comms background, or is it kind of everybody's included and anyone who worked on the Hill can probably find a place to work over at Purple?
Sure. I mean, it's one of the best things about Purple is that diversity of experience. So yes, we have comms people, we have people straight from the Hill like myself, but we also have people that worked in other larger agencies, like your Leo Burnett creative agencies or your Edelman public affairs agencies, and bringing in all those perspectives into one kind of house is really effective for our clients.
Nice. Well, that's great. All right, so we have to talk about this. You made the coveted jump from intern to chief of staff. Obviously, that is what everyone comes to DC who wants to work on the Hill wants to do, is to make it all the way up to true senior staff and to run an office and work directly with a member. So I think people don't really know if that's even possible or the right way to go about it, if you have to work on a campaign to get tied to a certain member, and that's how you get in. But that wasn't your case, so tell us a little bit about your story. How long did it take? What did the process look like? And what were kind of the key moments that helped get you there?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say people kind of come to DC with that in mind. I didn't really. I kind of can't. I joke with you and others I didn't really have a plan. Yeah. The plan was get a job on the Hill,
For sure.
And I took that unpaid internship to get started. And I think the typical, the staff assistant left. And so then I was the intern that was there and was able to kind of become the staff assistant. Yeah. And then, a year later, the LC left and I became the new LC, right? And so the first few jumps were pretty typical. I think where I benefited was my boss actually lost her reelection. And so and I had just become like a legislative director.
Yeah.
And I was looking for a job and kind of in the wilderness politically at the time. And I ended up getting my first time working at the NRCC, where I got some of that campaign experience. And I happened to meet a few members or candidates that became members during that time. And one of them hired me to be his legislative director.
Perfect.
So kind of moved right back into the role I was in before. But then circumstances turned out that our chief went back to the home state to help run the campaign, and I became the chief. So from intern to when I became chief, it was 6 years.
Gotcha.
Which was pretty fast.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think, honestly, I wish at every single position, because I hit every position along the food chain, if you will, I wish I would have spent a little bit longer, to be honest. I think there's kind of each position in a Hill office is kind of iterative. They build on one another. You pick up skills along the way to do the next job better. And so I felt a little young and a little underprepared when I first became chief, and probably could have waited a couple more years to really be more seasoned and better prepared for that job. But I mean, I was, it's a lot of circumstance and opportunity and a little bit of luck, and I ended up where I did,
Yeah, I feel like that's got to be hard too for the people that do come in as like a campaign manager and get someone elected and they come straight into chief of staff. I don't know how anyone does that, and props to you for being successful for the people out there that have done that. But that's got to be so hard to come in without like a lot of knowledge about that internal Hill process or the bureaucracy of it. And so I'm sure it was nice to, while you may feel like you still needed more preparation, to have been in each person's shoes in that office to really understand how a congressional office works.
Yeah, I mean, I admire the people that kind of go right into those roles, those senior roles, and are successful. You see a lot of burnout from that, as well as people it doesn't work out. But there's just as many that do. For me, again, I think it was nice to have a little bit of that experience going in. Wish I would have had a little bit more. But the other thing I would say is people thinking about becoming a chief, like that chief job was different than I thought it was going to be. The things that I thought I would be primarily doing, I wasn't doing as much. And by that, I mean like managing like a staff, or really, working with or, and mentoring like up and coming staff within our office back in the state and back to district. And really you just end up being with the boss a lot, and a lot of political things and all that. And it takes up a lot of your time. So for some people that might be exactly what they want to do. For me, it was like, I didn't realize I was going to be doing quite this much of that.
For sure. And I think the chief of staff role you think is just like the culmination of the policy route, when in reality it's more administrative than anything, and being in operations. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that in their way up of like, I want to be a chief. And I think chiefs will say this too, is like, it's not all it's cracked up to be sometimes. But as far as like those people that are like, hey, I want to become a chief of staff one day, what kind of advice would you give them now to prepare and to understand what that role will look like?
Sure. Well, like I kind of said before, I mean, soak up all the knowledge you can where you're at. I feel like every job prepares you for the next job. That's the most true thing about those Hill positions. I'll sidebar for a second. I think, like, for instance, the LC job, which is the lowly LC, people hate being the legislative correspondent in the office.
Shout out to the
I think
LCs.
it's like, I think it's the most important job in the office in terms of like preparing you for everything else.
Yeah, there's so much development in that process.
A ton. You learn how to research, you learn how to write, you learn how to work with other staff. You might be managing the interns. Like, you're learning a lot of skills. So pick up everything you can along the way. And then the political side of things does help. So if you have the opportunity to, work on a campaign or volunteer on a campaign, just to get a flavor of that and a taste of that can really benefit you, because whether you're in a safe seat or an extremely vulnerable seat like I always was, like, you're going to need some political acumen as well.
For sure. That's, I think, where the people that have come up through the food chain just on the House side or Senate side of things, like on the official side, don't really understand how that world works necessarily. You just get bits and pieces of it. So to make that transition and to have experience in both the worlds, I'm sure really sets you up for a full experience as a chief.
Yeah, I mean, I think the political side and the official side, like doing both made me better at both.
Yeah, for sure.
So, like you were saying, there's people that kind of come up on the official side and they're like really smart, highly skilled, understand the policy, understand how a bill becomes a law, which is not a linear thing,
sure.
that there's a lot that goes into that. But they don't have a political bone in their body, and they don't like kind of see the landmines that might be in front of them when they're trying to move legislation, or understand why someone might oppose something, or how like something they're working on is going to be framed by their opponent.
For sure.
On the other side of things, you got all these political people that are extremely talented and smart in their skill set. They can, chapter and verse on, media points and like, how do we, advance a message and how do we run a campaign? But they don't have a clue about how a bill becomes a law or any of that. If you, and unfortunately, there's far too few people that really have good experience in both, and there should be more. So people should take advantage. So campaign people should do a tour of duty on the official side as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, at least in my position, I was always so afraid to go to the campaign because I didn't want to live that lifestyle of like living out of weird hotels or motels and like working 9 to 9 days or whatever that may be. Or at least that's the stereotype of what life on a campaign is like. So, as someone who's done it, what does it look like? What are you going to get out of it? And then what is that value transfer to the Hill? So we can dive off from there.
Yeah. So there definitely is that experience that you described where it's like you're living in a Motel 6 in Fargo, North Dakota, and you're, and it's tough.
Long distance from Navy Yard.
Right. But I would say there's other campaign experience to be had. So most of my campaign experience was with one of the party committees. Now, those aren't easy jobs to get, but they are there. But there's campaign organizations all over Washington, D.C. that run not just like maybe House or Senate races, but grassroots campaigns around advocacy issues, or other, coalition groups that work in that campaign space. I think it's just getting that knowledge. It doesn't necessarily need to be like on the ground door knocking knowledge. It's like, how do campaigns work? Like,
For sure.
Especially in 2024. It's a different thing.
One of the most interesting parts about working on the campaign, especially at the committee level compared to like boots on the ground, is you start to understand that intimate relationship between a congressional office and how they work with the campaign committees. So in your time there, how did you start to understand that relationship, and how did it build value for you once you went back to the Hill?
You're absolutely right. You do get like kind of a different relationship, not only with, incumbent members that are obviously a part of those party committees and running their campaigns, but you get to meet a lot of candidates. And in my role, I was the head of our policy department at the NRCC, and I did a lot of like candidate education and then also like issue research.
Nice.
And working within the other teams at the NRCC. So there's communications team, there's a political team, there's a research team. But I happen to work in cycles where policy actually mattered a lot in that given election cycle. And
Crazy idea.
I mean, it's not the case now, but it was not too long ago the case. And spent a lot of my time working with members and candidates, just like, this is literally what this thing is, this policy or this issue, and here's how we can talk about it, and here's what they're going to say about it. And so I got to kind of really interact a lot with candidates on like that side of things, which was really rewarding. But it was educational for me because I got to see, like, prior to that, I just worked in a personal office.
You only see one office's way of doing it.
Right. And so then I saw lots of members, lots of chiefs coming over, and like how they interacted with the committee.
For sure.
And they're all dealing with, a wide spectrum of political realities in their own districts. Like some are safe, some are vulnerable. And so it was a really educational time for me.
That's great. It's got to be fun too, to just like paint the full picture there. And so you've done all of that. You become a chief of staff, and then you go over and take a senior role on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which of course is extremely impressive too. So tell us a little bit more about your experience there. Plus, how is it different from working in a personal office? Yeah.
So how I ended up at the Energy and Commerce Committee was I struck up a relationship with then a former member who has since retired. His name is Greg Walden of Oregon.
Yeah, for sure.
He was the vice chair at the NRCC during one of the cycles I worked there, and then he was the chairman in a different cycle that I worked there. And so we had struck up a relationship there and always got along really well. And when he won the chairmanship at ENC, he asked me and a couple other folks from the NRCC that had worked with him to come over.
That's
and
great.
He wanted to bring that sort of campaign communications mindset to the official side, to
sure.
the committee. We knew energy and commerce deals with a lot. It's a really wide, jurisdiction. And it was right in the middle of a lot of like really heated battles, specifically on healthcare and tech issues.
Yeah, for sure.
And so he just wanted to really strengthen that muscle at the committee. So that's how I ended up there. And it was really great. But like the differences are dramatic. I mean, first, the committee staff is large. I mean, I think I don't know if this is I think it was about 80 people, Republicans and Democrats, on both sides. I mean, there's a minority and a majority staff. The majority is about 2/3 of that number. But it's a lot of people. There's a lot of really smart people. All the subcommittees are staffed up. And so getting to work with all those like different, like really smart, professional, senior people was really exciting. In a personal office, you're dealing with just vastly different issues, namely constituents. You don't have to deal with that as much on the committee. Well, I should say the constituents are different. The constituents are the members of that committee, or leadership. But you're not dealing so much with the public, but you're really in the thick of like policy development, like the engine of putting bills out and getting them on the floor. And it's just a very different process.
I think that sets you up for a really good like specialization that creates value later as well. But to go back to that process of working on the campaign committees and getting so much exposure to different members obviously proved extremely valuable. But for the staffers out there wondering like, how does it create value to go over there? I think that's a prime example of it sets you up for a big time gig back on the Hill.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and even broadening that out, I think a lot of people, this even gets back to your question about how do I go from intern to chief of staff. Like, the Hill's a small town.
Yeah.
Like, DC's a small town. Like, everyone kind of knows everyone eventually. And the person that's the intern today will probably be a chief or an LD or something tomorrow. And so the relationships you sort of pick up along the way, the people you get to work with along the way, you're not only like in that moment having that interaction, but it's going to prove fruitful down the road. Like my intersection with Greg Walden turned into this like probably the coolest job I'll ever have, which was like working at the Energy and Commerce Committee. And that was just, we had met previously and worked together previously. And that's a big example, but there's smaller examples all throughout my career and other people's careers where it's kind of like who have you met, who have you worked with, who have you left a good impression with. So, think about that as you move through your career. It's like that stuff's really important. Yeah,
that's exactly where my mind went with that is I feel like a lot of times on the Hill, especially, you can feel like you're doing hard work, you're doing a good job, and you feel like people might not be noticing, or you might not be getting recognition. And so it's like, don't look towards those like outward validation things, because all it takes is one experience for someone to pick up on like, oh, this guy's a really good worker. Like, I'll keep that in my mind. And so obviously Walden's not going to call you up for that gig if he didn't notice something in you where he's like, all right, like that's the guy I want to call. If you set yourself up to be that, work on just building yourself up as a staffer and like creating more value for yourself, and don't worry about external validation, and one day it comes.
Yeah, I mean, I think something you said in there is really important. I think people do get kind of hung up on recognition in the moment, right? Am I getting recognized? Is the boss noticing, or other people seeing how cool I am or whatever? And then there's the doers, that are like getting stuff done, and people notice that as well. For sure. It may not show up in like the Connect podcast, right? You may not get invited on that right away, or you might not show up in Heard on the Hill or things like that, or in Playbook, but like people notice good work. For sure. And you can build a reputation as a reliable, thoughtful, strong worker, and that will translate down the road.
Yeah, I feel like people get that mindset too, where a lot of people in DC fail up, you know, like there are those people out there that seem to keep moving up, even though it doesn't really seem like they're putting in the same level of work. But I do believe hard work and just a good mindset is always going to triumph that at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely people that have failed up. Like, let's not, like that happens, but that happens in any career, any field.
It's not unique
like,
to the Hill.
Yeah, no, not at all. But I think, yeah, the second half of that, if you're working and you're building that reputation and then you're forging those relationships and people know that they can trust you, they know that, you know, you're gonna, you know, come through in the end, like all those kind of things, even in the small things, like that LC, like just cranking through mail, you know,
For
like
sure.
that means something.
All right, let's switch topics a little bit here. Obviously, you're super successful in your walk on the Hill side of the professional side of things, but you've been here almost 20 years in DC. So how do you keep up that success while also creating a good work-life balance so you create a successful home relationship as well?
Yeah, so, you know, I was married when I moved to DC.
That helps.
Which was helpful. God bless all of you who are in the DC dating scene. I know a lot of you are going through that. But I thankfully was married. But then I had, you know, while I was on the Hill, we had our daughter. So I do have a family at home. And I think the way to, you know, get balance is honesty. Yeah. And by that, I mean being honest with your work, honest with your family, and honest with yourself. So like with work, like my family will win the day, right?
For sure.
And the most important thing that's going to happen is whatever's going on with my family. However, like there are things about these jobs and our careers that like need to take precedent in certain moments.
Yeah,
and so being honest with your family about that, like today I have to do this, or this week's going to be tough, right? Like just being open about that. But then like honest with yourself, which I think is really important for Hill staff. Like, do you need to go to that reception?
Yeah, for sure.
Like really need to go, or can you go home, right?
Yep.
Or can you go out with a friend that you need to spend time with? Or can you get dinner with your parents if they're in town? Like being honest with yourself about those opportunities. So it's a little bit of a three-legged stool balance, but it's all built on just being honest about what's going on in your life. And that will help you get the balance there.
Yeah.
But your family's, if you have a family, like that's number one.
For
and
sure.
If something's going on there, that needs to win the day.
Yeah, and I think it's really easy to get your priorities out of whack because also when you're on the Hill, it's really easy to think like this matters so much.
Right.
Like I am at the center of the political universe right now. And so it's hard to zoom out at times and realize, oh, there's other stuff out here that affects me more long-term than my political relationships right now. So I think like if you have your priorities straight, if you have confidence in that priority process, then you can kind of lean back on that and know, hey, I'm going to put my family first. I'm going to communicate well. And if I have to miss that reception or that campaign event, things are going to work out in the end because I'm doing things the right way.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
For sure. Yeah. So on that note, going into the other side of like who you are personally, who are you outside of work?
Yeah, I mean, an important point is like you should be someone outside of work.
Yes,
you know,
that's what we're getting at here.
Because I think you know it's really easy, and I've fallen victim to this too. It's really easy to get your whole personality and self-worth wrapped up in these jobs.
It's easy.
It's really easy because, to your point earlier, like sometimes you are at the center of the political universe and it matters, right?
For sure.
But that's not who you are. And so I think it's really important to have relationships outside of work, not just your family, but like friends and other people that you can be engaged with that have nothing to do with politics.
Yeah,
that will keep you very grounded, right? Because then you realize like no one knows what you're talking about or what's going on, and it doesn't matter, as much as you think.
Yep.
And like life matters, these relationships matter, like being around other people matters. And so I think that's really important. So for me, I have a good set of now that I'm at Purple, I get to work with folks, on a day-to-day basis that weren't necessarily involved with politics. Right. But I also have a set of friends that aren't in politics, and it's kind of funny. They're in DC. To me, it's like, why are you here?
Like, why are you here?
But this is their life, right?
Yeah.
And that's helpful too. And then this, David, but we have a church community that I'm a part of that really is helpful too, to just have another network of people that weren't involved in politics.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we've talked a lot about campaign world and like these kind of high pressure hill jobs and things like that. You do forge like really strong bonds within that. And
You're in it together.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of in a foxhole, right?
Yep.
You're gonna really get to know people and forge those relationships. I have a few different like little groups of people that I've worked with along the way that, I mean, I'm still like very dear friends with those folks. And that also kind of helps you grounded. Like, for sure. That reminds you of like, yeah, you went through some tough stuff before, but it's 10 years later and you're fine, right? Yeah. Like, and these guys are all fine too, right? Yeah. So that's really important.
Yeah, I think a few things I want to highlight there. One, obviously get friends outside of politics. Have conversations that aren't about politics, because I mean, it's so funny. I always remember like Cap Lounge back in the day of walking in there and you could go to any table and hear some version of the same conversation. It's like, let's figure out what we like to do outside of work and bond over those things as well. But also, you're selling yourself short. You didn't talk about your musical abilities, so I'm going to make you talk about those now. Tell us.
Yeah. Well, first, I think the Cap Lounge thing is really funny because I always joke with folks, like usually the people talking the loudest know the least, and if you just listen, you'll pick up on that pretty quickly, like really strong opinions that, so be careful with those Cap Lounge conversations. Cap Lounge is gone though.
Yeah. Sad RIP.
Sad RIP. No, yeah. So outside of work, I dabble in music. It's like my hobby. If I could do anything and money didn't matter and whatever, I'd probably just play music.
Nice.
But yeah, it's a really important thing. And also kind of something that isn't get hobbies that aren't political.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Yeah,
gives your brain this outlet to do something more creative and to kind of zone out from that world.
Totally. I mean, I even talked to my daughter about this now. It's like you've got your academics that you need to be on point, right? Or your job, you need to be on point with that. But do something physical and do something creative.
For sure.
Like just well-rounded, like you said, like just give you some mental space to do. And it doesn't have to be music. It could be whatever. But
yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. Okay, so you play the bass, you play the guitar. Yeah. Is there anything else?
No, that's it. Any kind of guitar.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I usually see you on the acoustic, but do you like electric more or do you like the acoustic world?
So as I've gotten older, I kind of have gravitated more towards the acoustic, but I used to be a pretty mean electric player, and I have too many guitars in a closet at home from past lives.
All right, well, let's really go down this rabbit hole for a second. In those younger Jordan years, who were your like musical icons where you kind of mirrored your style off of, or what got you interested in guitar, like playing?
It's easier to answer that question than it is to talk about my mid 90s musical influences.
Yeah.
But so the story about the guitar was I was in 8th grade and my dad had kind of dabbled in guitar, but didn't really play, but there was a guitar sitting in a closet at home. And so I actually went, it was 8th grade. I was trying to impress girls and I had a girl I was really interested in. And I went to a party, like an middle school birthday party or something. And there was this girl I was interested in. And then there was this other guy in our class that showed up with a guitar and played it. And all the girls were like swooning. And I was like, I can't believe this. And so like I went home and I'm like, I'm learning how to play guitar today. And so that was the like inciting incident. And then like I started playing guitar. It's like, man, I kind of like playing guitar. And then I kind of forgot about the girl. And
there you go.
Have been playing since I was 12 years old.
So. I don't think that ever goes out of style too, of like being able to play the guitar well does have this sort of clout around you of, hey, I can do this thing that's really cool.
I know. Yeah. I mean, it works. Ask my wife.
Love that for you. Thank you for sharing. So quickly on that, like the family front, I feel like I've heard from people working on the Hill that they just don't feel like it's possible to start a family and to dedicate your time to both, right? And I'm sure it's extremely hard, but I do believe it's possible. And you're a great example of how you've been successful in politics and creating a home life that works. So what's your advice to the people out there? Like, I don't know if I can really do this.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard when we had a child, and that was kind of right in the middle of my Hill career, and it came back to just being like I needed to get my priorities straight.
For sure.
But sometimes like work was going to have demands on me, and I needed to be accepting of that. When my daughter was younger, that actually was a little bit easier. I mean, they're going to bed early, it's fine. As she got older, I knew I needed to be more and more present, right? I wanted to be present all the time, but just be more and more present because she was more and more aware.
Yeah, and she wasn't sleeping 18 hours a day.
Right. And so it was about just it was about making those choices. Thankfully, like the employers that I worked with, member and then Energy and Commerce and the NRCC were all really understanding, but they knew that I was coming at it from a good place too, that I was reliable and going to be there when I needed to be, but when I needed to get home, it was time to go home. So it's a tough balance. I'm not going to lie. It's different for everybody. Everyone's family situation is different. Everyone's child and spousal needs are different, but for me, it was just about, if everyone knew that I was trying to balance this correctly and that the priorities were in the right place, it made it a little bit easier.
For sure.
Yeah.
I also think that if you're growing growing as an adult and you're single or you're in that like fiance or just married stage, you don't realize how accommodating people are, especially work towards starting a family. And you realize some people can leave their job early and go work from home after they pick their kid up from school or whatever that is. And you're not thinking about that before the experience happens to you, but there is more leeway than one might realize.
Yeah, I think the pandemic was hard and we all went through it, but I think that's even more the case now.
Yeah.
Because people got used to these hybrid, even on the Hill, hybrid work environments and different working arrangements. And I think, it's kind of like what you just said, maybe I'm leaving early, right? But
you're not done with work.
I'm not done with work and I'm picking that up. And if everyone knows that, specifically the people, if you're in a leadership position, the people that work for you, the younger people that don't have the experience, don't realize that that's what's going to happen and don't, why does he get to go home early?
Right.
You've got to be intentional about making sure that they feel okay too. That's just being a good manager and a leader.
That's great advice.
Yeah. And so I am going home because I got to pick up the kid from school and make dinner and all that stuff. But then I'm back. You don't need to be online, but I'm going to be back online
for sure
at 8:00 tonight and finishing up what we need to get done. You know, so it's all about, like I said earlier, just honesty about that stuff.
Nice. That's great. Where I'd like to wrap up with this is the bipartisanship aspect, because this is Connect and we're legally obligated to talk about bipartisanship. So obviously working on energy and commerce, you get a lot of opportunities to work across the aisle. And same thing at Purple, you're working with people that might have been Democratic operatives too. So how did that symbiosis work on a committee and then in the private sector of building good relationships across the aisle and working well together?
Yeah, I mean, at Energy and Commerce, like I said before, there's a majority and a minority staff. So it's still a little like red team, blue team.
For sure.
But there is just the committee business that has to get done. And so you end up working, in some capacity together to make those happen. But your job is to represent your position, right? And so there's just inherent opposition. At Purple, we're very collaborative, right? And it's incredibly valued to have this diverse kind of perspectives on things, because that's kind of how you reach the best conclusions and outcomes. My advice for people, and it took me a little while to learn this, if I'm being honest, too, is just the people on the other side are also people.
Yep.
And they have just as good of intentions as you think you do, right? You just have different perspectives on things.
For sure.
And one of the most illuminating things for me on this was I was at a reception at Purple. We were just doing an office post-staff meeting, happy hour, and I was talking to one of our staff who had come from the other side of the aisle, and she was very much on the other side of the aisle, pretty far away from where I was. But we just struck up a conversation about nothing in particular. And then she just stopped cold at one point. She's like, I've never had this long of a conversation with a Republican before. And like, this has been really great. Like, I can't, and I'm like, you should talk to more of us.
It's mind altering,
Yeah. And so like, they're other people. They have lives outside of work, right?
Yep.
You probably have common interests.
Yep.
You probably have a lot more in common than you don't.
Exactly.
And like, so the best you can, like, try to get relationships with people that don't agree with you politically. Sure. I think that's really helpful and healthy.
Yeah, it's extremely enlightening, and it's so easy to get stuck in your circles or echo chambers on the Hill or in politics in general, because those are the people you're around all the time, right? Mm-hmm. It's really easy to become friends. You have something in common automatically, no matter what. But that similar experience for me, it was when I was intentional about building a relationship with someone who didn't have the same view as me.
Yeah.
It made me realize, holy crap, we agree on so much more than I thought. And we can have fun with this and have these discussions and not take it so seriously. And then it kind of just blew my mind a little bit of, why have I been stuck in this bubble for so long? I'm missing out.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays, now that I'm in the private, it's harder when you're on the Hill, but now that I'm quasi in the private sector, one of the last things I want people to know about me is kind of whatever my party affiliation was, or like
member affiliation too.
The specific people I worked for. Not that I'm not proud of those people and that time in my life, but there comes with so much like preconceived.
For sure, it's very defining if you let it be. And
so like I'd rather just get to know you as a person first, and then we'll find out like, oh, we disagree on a few things, but that's all right. I know who you are. You know. So totally.
All right. Ending it there. That's the perfect end to it. Get to know people outside of work. Realize there's a lot of other things to find out about people that aren't R or D next to their name. So, cool. Jordan, as always, it's great to talk to you. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thanks, man. It was great.
All right. We're out. Hey, it's David again. Thank you guys for listening today. We're really excited about this Capital Spotlight podcast and getting it off the ground. So make sure to tune in again. And the easiest way to do that is subscribe to our channels. Check us out on social media at ConnectApp, CNCTAPP, basically everywhere. So find us there, subscribe to our newsletter, and check out our website, capitalconnect.com. Thanks, guys.